Welcome, everyone. I am so happy to have you. I have missed some of your familiar faces, and I look forward to getting to know some of the new folks that have joined us today for this very special event. My name is April Cox, and I am the creator of Self-Publishing Made Simple. I have a number of events like this planned. So I do hope you'll check out the website and join me for other activities and events coming up. So today we have a special guest speaker, Brooke Vitale. Did I pronounce the last name right?
You did, thank you.
Oh, good. Brooke has been a children's book editor for nearly 20 years, started her career at Sterling Publishing before moving on to Penguin and then Disney. The picture that is up on the site and the books behind her are all books that she has edited, and there's an amazing cast of incredible books. And I happened to meet Brooke through a client that we both worked together to bring his book to life, and she did such an amazing job that I reached out and engaged with her for collaboration opportunities and to bring some of her unique perspective to folks here as well. So I hope you enjoy the topic today. Is your book good enough? So without further ado, here's Brooke Vitale.
Thank you, April. I appreciate it. Hi, it's really nice to see everybody. So, is your book good enough? Is your book worth publishing? There are a lot of factors that go into that question. And of course, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what is your motivation in publishing the book? Is it just that you have a story that you want to share with the world? Is it that you want to see a book published under your name? There are plenty of people who just want to say, I've put out a children's book, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The question today, I think, comes down a little bit more to, is my book good enough to make money? Because at the end of the day, publishing is a business, and most of us want to, at the very least, recoup what we put into our books. So we're going to talk about some of the things that go into what makes a book good enough to put out there, some of the things that you should keep in mind when you're working on the book, and adjustments that you can make as you move forward with your book to address problems you may not even know you have. With traditional publishing, which is where I come from, the publishers have a lot of things that you don't have. They can get the books into the bookstores. They can buy end cap displays. For them to get your book advertised in Publishers Weekly or USA Today is not a big deal. They might even put your book on a bus ad or, a subway ad. I've seen it happen. It doesn't happen often with children's books, but it does. It's money that, as a self-publisher, the odds are you do not have. You're not going to be able to do most of what they can do. So a lot of what you're doing is you're getting out on Amazon. You're trying to drive ads that way. And unfortunately, what that means is that most self-published books and most self-published authors are competing for exactly the same attention in exactly the same space. So when you're doing that, one of the first things that you need to think about is, what else is out there in the space that I am publishing into? When it comes to book themes, there are a lot of themes out there that are evergreen. No matter how many books come out on them, they all seem to do well. Bedtime is the top-selling theme. It has been forever, and it makes sense because we read books to our kids at bedtime. We want something that lulls them into the idea of actually going to sleep instead of jumping around and getting a sip of water and going to the bathroom and all of the things that they are going to do. Friendship is a big one. Farm stories are huge because one of the first things we teach our kids are, what does a pig say? What does a cow say? It's something that they're familiar with. They like pirates. They like aliens, sometimes outer space. They like dinosaurs. A lot of these are either play patterns that they're familiar with or life experiences that they can relate to. Because especially with a picture book, your audience is 3 to 7 years old. It can stretch a little higher than that, especially if you have a younger child you're also reading to, but that's really your core demographic. So those areas are all things that they can understand. Then there are the publishing trends. And I do not know how you guys as authors do it, but somehow these trends come out that everybody hits at the exact same time without talking to each other. It's amazing to me. A couple years ago in YA, everything was dystopian because of the Hunger Games. A few years before that, everything was vampires because of Twilight. And a lot of that hit even before those books came out. That just was the theme that everybody hit on. So I ran some numbers before coming to talk to you guys today, and I want to read you a few numbers of what I have edited in the last 12 months, personally. 4 books on kids going to outer space. 5 books about choosing a career and what career options are. 3 books about self-love, 6 books about mindfulness, and 6 books about being in touch with your feelings. 6 books about the first day of school. 6 books about coronavirus. And 15 books about kids traveling to different countries. I am one editor, and I am seeing that. I don't know what everybody else is seeing, but that should give you some feel for some of these topics that are starting to get a little bit oversaturated. I talked to somebody who sells into Barnes & Noble a couple of weeks ago, and they told me Barnes & Noble doesn't want any more books on mindfulness. They have enough of them. They would like to see a book about a happy-go-lucky kid, please. Can they just have a kid having a fun adventure? Because they've got enough in mindfulness, they don't need to see any more of it. So that's not to say that in these spaces, there isn't room. There absolutely is room, but you need to find a way to make your book unique. What is it about your story that is setting it apart from everything else that's out there? And one of the only ways that you're going to be able to figure that out, honestly, is to do your research. If you were reaching out to an agent or a publisher to publish traditionally, you would want to know comp titles in sending out your query letters. You need to do the same thing as a self-published author. You need to go online. You need to see what is out there, and you need to find out what's coming. We are part of a very big Facebook community that likes to talk to each other. You guys all love to share what you're working on, talk about how to do things. Go out there and ask, who's publishing a book on trucks this year? Who has a book coming about dinosaurs? You're going to get a lot of answers. You're going to get answers on when people are publishing it. That's key too, because it's fine for 8 books about trucks to come out, but you don't want them all to hit on the same day because you're all going to be vying for that bestseller status on the same day. So if you can know it's coming and you can start to plan around that, that's going to really help you in figuring out where your book fits and if your book fits. If you ask that question and you're writing about dinosaurs and you get 300 other people that tell you that they're writing about dinosaurs this year, start to think if you're going to be able to get your book to stand out. Or is it just another book? Is there something special about it and something special that you can push about it? The other piece of this is asking yourself if the book that you're writing is going to become dated soon. So I told you I've edited 6 books this year on coronavirus. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. A lot of them came back in March, April, May. And the fabulous thing about the self-publishing community is that you guys did what publishers couldn't. You wrote the books, you got them out, and you got them out fast. A couple months ago, after I had seen a few of these, I asked a friend who works at HarperCollins if they were publishing anything against coronavirus, and she said, not a thing. We can't get it out fast enough. It'll take us 2 years to get these books done properly and get them out, and it will be over by then. So there's space for you guys when these trends hit to get on them and get your books out, especially if it's something that you feel passionate about. But you need to know where you are in that window of time. If you're at the beginning of the bubble, that's fantastic. Like I said, 6 books on coronavirus that all came out in April, May, June. That's great. People needed it then. Now we're starting to look at getting a vaccine. We're coming to the end of this. Somebody who's starting one now and isn't going to get it out for 4 months is going to have 2 months of selling time, 3 months of selling time. They're going to have missed the window on it. The thing about whether a book is worth publishing, and especially if you're trying to make money on it, is shelf life. As a publisher, we want something that backlists, something that's going to sell year after year after year. Because once the book is done, it's all about profit. You're not putting more money into it. You're getting money out of it, we hope, other than advertisement. If it's something that's going to sit on a bookshelf for a month, 2 months, and then nobody's going to be interested anymore, you have to ask yourself whether it's worth the time you're going to put into it, whether it's worth the money you're going to put into it, or if you're better to move on to another idea. Now, you might be passionate about it. It might be something that you feel is really important to get out there, and that's totally fine. But keep all of those things in mind as you think about whether the book should be happening or not. And the other thing you might want to think about is if there's a way to extend the shelf life on that book. So we hopefully have coming up this year the Olympics. Kids love the Olympics. Adults love the Olympics. An Olympics book might sound fantastic time to them, but as soon as the Olympics is over, there's nothing left to sell. But a book about a sports competition, a book about a specific sport that's going to happen in the Olympics this year, that's going to have a shelf life that can continue to live. It's going to have a shelf life that 2 years from now when the Olympics come back, 4 years from now when they come back, it can always backlist and you can come back out with it and say, hey, here we are, here's this thing, and it's still relevant today. So keep in mind the relevance. Keep in mind if you're putting something out that by the time it's out, you can't do anything with it anymore. That moves me to my next point, which we were talking about the Olympics. If you put out a book on it, the Olympics is your hook on that book. That's your tie-in. Whatever you're publishing, it should have some sort of hook to it. What is your book tied to, and who is your audience? Make sure you know the answer to that question. I know that we all want to say, my book is for every child who loves to read and every parent who loves to read to their child. And that is a lovely sentiment, and it is not at all true. If I hand a book about dinosaurs to my 3-year-old son, he just doesn't care. If I hand a book about ballet to him, he's interested because he likes to watch pirouettes. So you need to know who your audience is. You need to know who you're targeting. If you don't have a target audience for your book, that's a problem. And part of the reason that's a problem is because you cannot develop a marketing plan if you do not have a target audience. Going out and putting out ads on Facebook and on Amazon is fantastic, but again, you're all hitting the same audience. So you need to know who you're targeting so that you can go out and hit that targeted audience. If it's a book about outer space, are there science centers that you can go out to and you can talk to them? If it's a book about mommy and a child, what parenting groups can you hit that are going to really target that? I've seen books come through about children with certain disabilities. What groups can you hit that are really interested in finding books that are about children like that, because they're looking for books their own child can relate to. The more focused your book is, the more likely it's going to be a book worth publishing, because you're going to be able to find the audience that you're looking for. And it's not just going to be throw it out there. The book looks pretty okay, I'll give it a shot. You also want to give a little bit of thought to where and when your book sits on a bookshelf. I know right now a lot of your books are being sold online, but if you're really going to be a successful author, you want your book to sit at Barnes & Noble or Target or Walmart or wherever else it is the books are being sold. So give some thought to how those bookstores are arranged. If you walk through the aisles, what are the categories that you're seeing there? And I know that April works a lot with you guys on categories for Amazon and publishing, but also walk through a store. Are you falling in one of those areas that a bookstore would know where to put a book? Or are they going to get your book and they're going to say, I don't know what to do with this? Because a book that goes, I don't know what to do with this, you're going to have a hard time getting it in a store. You're going to have a hard time getting that traction behind it. Same thing with when. Is there that promotional moment behind it? Like we were saying with the Olympics, there's a moment. If you have a book about a mom, you're going to hit Mother's Day. If you have a book about a dad, you're going to try and time to Father's Day. Any place where you can really get a strong connection is fantastic. And it doesn't mean that your book has to be all about moms and how great they are. But even that smallest thread of connection gives you another opportunity to push the book out there. So see if you can do that. I'm not saying change your manuscript to make it work, but be aware of what's out there. We've seen a lot of books in traditional publishing starting to hit against smaller holidays. It used to be that books around Christmas And Easter and Halloween were the only holidays that sold. And these days, that's not the case anymore. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Grandparents' Day, those are all big. Graduation is a really, really big moment for books. And it's one of the few ones where it's a big moment for books, no matter the age range. Every single April, May, June, the number one bestseller on the children's book list is Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. Because it's bought for high school kids. It's bought for college kids. It's got that inspirational message behind it. If your book is inspirational, think about timing it around there, because you're going to have that push where people are looking for something to buy, not just for their 4-year-old, but for their 14-year-old, telling them it's okay, you can do it too. The other piece of this, of course, is if your book is worth publishing, it comes down to whether or not you yourself are passionate enough to get the book out there. And that's really, unfortunately, the big thing. If you can't market it, it doesn't matter how great your book is. It doesn't matter how fantastic it is. If you can't push and push hard, it's never going to be found. And if you can push hard, if you can put in that effort and you can get the traction, even a mediocre book can do phenomenally well because it starts to get word of mouth. So as you start thinking about, is my book worth publishing, really be honest with yourself about how much time and energy you have to devote to that side of it. Because as a self-published author, you don't have a publishing house backing you up. You don't have their money getting you on the Today Show. It has to be you pushing and going in the bookstores and going in every local shop near you and saying, I'm a local author, will you carry 5 copies of my book and see if it sells? If you don't feel like that's a thing that you can do, then whether or not your book is good isn't going to matter. So, like I said, be honest and ask yourself that question. So now we come down to the actual content of the book. And I know a lot of you are working on picture books, so that is what I'm going to focus on. Whether your book is worth publishing in a picture book, one of the big questions that goes there is it fitting the criteria of a picture book? Like I said earlier, the target audience for picture books are children ages 3 to 7. That means that the protagonist in a picture book should also be a child aged 3 to 7. There are books out there that are about adults. There are not many. They don't do as well. There's usually something about them that's specifically appealing to kids. Sometimes it's animals because they like animals, so they don't care if the main character is an adult. Kids want books they can understand. They want books that they can relate to. They can't relate to an adult. They can't relate to a teenager. That teenager has a different life experience. That teenager has a different problem than a 4-year-old has. And to try to get a 4-year-old to understand the problem of a 15-year-old, they're not going to have interest in the book. So keep in mind that you really, really want your book to be focused on the same age range that is reading it. I know in traditional publishing, the push right now is for all protagonists to be human. In self-publishing, you guys have a lot more wiggle room there. And I have 2 kids. They love books where the characters are animals. So I'm not saying don't do that. If you can write a fantastic book about a toaster, go for it. But make sure it's a kid toaster who's facing kid problems. Then move on to your word count. The traditional max length for a picture book is 1,000 words. The sweet spot is between 500 and 700 words. If your book is 100 words, chances are it's really too slim to have any kind of story worth reading. If your book is 4,000 words, there's way too much going on for a kid to pay attention to. And I'm going to be honest, there's way too much for a parent to read at night. If they look through the pages online and see that it's an 8x10 book where the whole book is covered with text, I wouldn't buy it because I know that bedtime is going to take me 45 minutes, not 20 minutes. And you also want to be able to keep the attention span of a child. 3 to 7-year-olds, they like something for 10 minutes and then they're off and running. So that's why that 500 to 700 word range really makes sense. Now, that's not to say that if your book is 1,300 words, you shouldn't publish it. Because there are books that absolutely need to be that length to tell the story that needs to be told. And if the book is reading smoothly and if it's compelling, then you're fine. But most books I see that are coming in at 15, 16, 1700 words have giant sections in them that don't belong there. And you could really do a much better job of trimming the book down. So look honestly at your word count and look honestly at whether everything needs to be there or not. I spoke a little bit earlier about making it also a subject that kids can relate to. Again, you want to go for something a little heavier, go for it. If you want to make it a picture book about bullying in school, I've seen them done, and I've seen them done very, very well. But there's a difference between somebody name calling in school and somebody pushing, shoving, and driving a child to the point of hurting themselves. You need to walk that fine line of this is the experience that a child of this age has and can understand, and stick to things that also aren't going to make uncomfortable conversations for parents that might not want to have those conversations. The last bit about the criteria, I think a lot of people have heard this, and this really stands more for traditional publishing than for self-publishing, which is books with rhymes don't sell. It's obviously not true. Books with rhymes sell very well. The problem is that most books with rhyme aren't done properly. So if you want a rhyming book, go for it. But your rhyme has to be impeccable. Your meter must be perfect. Because if I'm reading a book and I keep tripping up every other page because the meter's not right, I'm going to put it down and I'm not going to recommend it to anybody else. You want something that's lyrical. You want something that flows smoothly. Do not be the only person, if you're working on a book that rhymes, to read it. Get it in front of many, many people who can find the problems with it, because guaranteed, no matter how good you are, there are going to be problems with it. And you need to work all of those out. I myself have written dozens of books in rhyme, and my editors have sent them back with dozens of changes. As an author, you're too close to see every bit of it, so get spare eyes on it, because that, with a rhyming book, is the biggest thing that can make it not worth publishing, is not making sure that it's done as well as it can possibly be done. So that brings me to my last point, which is really the biggest part of, is my book worth it? Is my book good enough? And that is your story and your writing. And obviously that is not something that I could tell you here and now if your book is good enough, if the story holds up, if the writing's good, which is where an editor comes in. Unless you're illustrating a book on your own, editing is going to be the cheapest part of working on a book. It's also going to be the most important, because this is the moment where you can figure out what's wrong and if it can be fixed. There are books I have seen that require so much work, but at the end of the day, they are fantastic. And I have seen books that just can't get there. Sometimes it's a faulty premise. Sometimes it's a writer who just can't get it where it needs to be. Before you go out and start spending money on an illustrator, you want to know if you can get your book where it needs to be. Because otherwise you're putting a lot of money into something that either you're not going to sell, or you're going to sell and you're going to get bad reviews on, which you also don't want. So I want to just talk to you guys a little bit about the editorial process. I know a lot of you have gone through this program with April. A lot of you are working with other writers, so you know how at least it starts, which is that you're going to write it and then you're going to revise it and revise it and revise it and revise it, and then get it in front of your fellow writers. They are your first barrier to telling you whether your story has any merit, because you're all doing the same thing. You all understand the market together. You all understand what goes into story writing together. And you're a great avenue for support. You're a great avenue for finding solutions, because you're all creative thinkers. So you may be stuck, but somebody else goes, oh, well, of course the answer is this. And you go, why didn't I think of that? So use your fellow writers, bounce ideas off of them, take their ideas, revise your book. And then once you feel like you have done everything you can do with your book, or you cannot stand to look at your book for another second, go out and get yourself a professional editor who's going to tear your book apart. And I say that in the kindest way possible, because as an editor, it is our job to find everything that is wrong with your book, to make sure that you don't send it to a printer with those things still wrong with your book. So for me personally, I start every editorial process with what I call an editorial assessment. This is my moment to have a look over it and give you all of the big picture issues with your book. I am, for the most part, unless it's a book in rhyme where I'm trying to help you figure out the meter, not touching the language at this point. I am looking for things like, is there a plot hole that needs to be fixed? Is there a moment that doesn't make sense? Is there a scene out of order? Is there a scene that you don't need, which in a long book is usually the case? There's usually something there that can be completely cut out. Is your book too long? Is your book too short? Is your book lacking in any emotion? Are you telling me what's going on instead of showing me so I can't get inside your character's head? Are you telling your story from the wrong point of view? I have seen that come to me before where I read a book and I say, your protagonist is not your protagonist. That's the secondary character. This is the person whose point of view you should be telling this story from. Rewrite the entire thing that way. And I've had authors come back to me and say, this is the story I was supposed to be telling. But sometimes when it's your story, you're too close to actually see that. An assessment is also going to tell you whether there is a market for your book. You know, is there a place for it, or is it so out of the blue that you're going to struggle to find anybody to buy it? Because again, you guys are looking at spending a lot of your own money to publish these books. You need to know if you're going to have an uphill battle getting it out there. And that doesn't mean that if you are, you shouldn't do it, but you should be aware of it. And a good editor should be telling you if you're going to be struggling to get anywhere with the book. So once I have gone through, I would send you all of those notes. You would go through, you would make whatever revisions you agree with. Keep in mind that this is your book. So if you disagree with it, that's your business. At a publishing company, because they're paying to get things done, they really have more of a right to say to you, but this has to be changed. With self-publishing, you have the right to say, I don't care. This is how I want this book to be. You've sought the editorial advice, but if you disagree with it, that is your call, and this is your book that you have to feel good putting out there. If an editor is asking you for a change that you don't feel good about, say no. There is no reason that you have to do what an editor tells you. It is all advice. So for me, from there, I move on to what I call a developmental edit. Some people call it a substantive edit. Some people call it a line edit. That's where I am going in and I am working with every bit of the language. Is it age appropriate? Is the grammar correct? Is the sentence flowing the way it should be? Is the sentence reading how it needs to be to convey the thought that you're trying to express? That might still mean moving whole paragraphs around to make something make more sense. It might sometimes mean saying, I think we need to put this dialogue in a different character's mouth. Whatever it might be, that's really the stage where I am finessing everything and getting your book to the point of, this is beautiful, this is ready to move on to the next stage. It could be a single review. It could be 7 reviews. There's no right answer there because it depends, again, where you feel comfortable with your book. Even if I were to send something back to you and I think that it looks perfect, you could come back and say, no, this whole scene sounds horrible. What are you thinking? Let's keep working it. And that is your right as the author to keep working it until it feels 100% right to you. So once it is right, that's when the editorial process is theoretically over. The one thing I would suggest to all of you as you move on your books is always start with your editorial process. Never, ever, ever do your illustrations before your editor has looked at a book. Because I have seen so many books where I go, hey, can we change this? It's really not working. And my author says, yeah, but my art's locked. Can you work around it? So we end up putting out a book that's not as good as it could be because the money has already been spent on the art. So keep in mind all of the stages of a book because doing things out of order could give you a book that's not worth your time or your money because the book ends up subpar. So that's it. That's my advice for you guys on how to figure out whether your book is worth it. And April, I think we are going to maybe take some questions.
Yes, thank you. That's an amazing overview I'll go through some questions here. Carrie Ann is asking, you had talked about a number of different types of books. What about books about the environment?
I am seeing a couple of those come through, and I know that there is a place for them. I don't think it's going to be one of those subjects that the trend goes away, but I do think that it's a challenging topic for children at this age. So I would be really careful with how you express it, and I would do a lot of research on what else is out there to make sure that what you're doing is unique.
Good advice. Ben is asking, he doesn't know of any books that combine learning skills in the physical education setting. Would you consider this to be unique enough for publishers to want it if he doesn't self-publish?
Social skills, not just skills, social skills. I just wanted to be clear on that. Sorry.
Social skills. Yep. Thank you, Ben.
I'm sorry. So social skills in learning about them?
So he was mentioning social skills, learning social skills in the physical education setting.
I don't personally know of any. My general feeling about going for traditional publishing is that it comes down to how fast you want your book to come out. If this is something that you feel like needs to hit the market right now, then I think that self-publishing is the right way to go, because traditional publishing, from the moment you get an agent until the moment the book comes out, is going to be somewhere between 2 and 3 years. If you feel like you've got the time to sit with it, then there's no harm in trying to find an agent. Because the worst case scenario is you dedicate 6 months to looking for one, and if you can't find one, then you move on to doing self-publishing anyway. But you might find that there is one who is looking for what you're working on. Agents see so many books coming their way that they know a lot more what is trending, what the upcoming trends are, and what the publishers are actually asking for. And when you go out and you look up individual agents, you'll find that usually they give you a list of the very specific kinds of books that they're looking to acquire, because they know that's what they can sell in. So I think it's worth trying if you feel like it's a book good enough to put out there and you feel like you can dedicate the time to looking for an agent before you self-publish.
Thank you, Brooke. Roger is asking, how do you balance a target audience of kids versus a target audience of the kids' parents and adults who are actually purchasing the book?
That is a great question. Hi, Roger. I can't see you, but it's nice to have you here. You know, you're really marketing a book toward parents. That's true, because they are the ones, for the most part, who are choosing books. Parents, I would say, choose books on content. Children choose books on art. They see covers they like and they want it. You really need to just find a space that feels like a good book for a parent, a story that feels like something that if you're trying to teach a lesson, it's a lesson that they might want to learn. You know, there's not a great answer to that question, unfortunately, because every parent is different and every parent wants to give their child a different kind of book. You know, there are plenty of books out there. We were talking earlier about coronavirus. There are so many books out there that are talking about what it is and how it's coming out. And Sesame Street did a whole thing on it, explaining it to kids. I have chosen not to show anything like that to my 3 and 5-year-old because I don't want them learning about it in any way but from me. I need it in my words, especially on a sensitive topic. So I think it depends what your subject is and how you're approaching it. And if it's something that you think is going to be more appealing to a parent than to a child looking at the book and saying, I want that, then I would be marketing to parenting groups and trying to get them in on the ground floor.
That's good advice. Thank you. Jenny's asking, how do you know when you're done with the editing phase and your book is ready for the next phase?
That's a really good question. And the answer truly is you're probably never done with the editing phase. There comes a point, though, when it's time to just say it's good enough. Usually, especially if you're working with an editor should be able to tell you this book is solid. Every word may not be perfect. There are going to be times when you want to go back and you want to change them. There are going to be times when your book is printed and in your hands and you go, I really wish this said something different. The best advice I can offer you is that when the book feels close enough to perfect to you, I would move on to your design and your art stage, because you're not locked at that moment. You can still make small changes. Don't move on there unless you're sure that the story is right and the story moments are right. But if you're looking at small phrasing, that's okay. The rule of thumb that I always gave myself when I was working at Penguin and Disney was, once a book was in layouts, I had one round to make text changes. If I wasn't finding the problem by that point, it wasn't important enough to change.
Okay. Are there any tips, Roger's asking, any tips of what an author should do before hiring the editor? For example, alpha, beta testing, before submitting the words to an editor?
Again, I would meet with fellow writers. I would workshop the book, get as much feedback as you can. The one person I would say do not read this book to is your family and friends. They love you. They will tell you your book is fantastic, even if it is the worst thing that has ever been written, because they love you. And so they're going to think it's fantastic. You want people who understand the market. You want people who can give you actual critical feedback on your book. Beta readers exist. I am not 100% up on how they work and whether they're just other authors. I would say that author workshopping is your better way, because it gives you a lot more back and forth as opposed to just some sort of reader's report on what they think doesn't work.
Can you explain the concept when you say author workshopping? What do you mean by that?
So there's a lot of author groups out there. The biggest one is SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And they have a lot of local chapters where you can get together with fellow children's book writers. You would swap your stories. Everybody will read them. You guys will meet together. You'll discuss them. What worked? What didn't work? It becomes a point of conversation. That's a chance to get somebody else who really gets the craft of children's book writing to provide feedback on your story. And doing that is so critical because they will see things that you don't. They might see pitfalls that they had on a previous book that aren't going to come to your attention. So when I say workshopping, I literally mean getting in a room with other authors and reading each other's work and sharing your thoughts on it.
Okay, great. Carrie's wondering, how do you choose the size of your book?
That is a great question, and it comes down primarily to how you plan to print your book. If you plan to do print on demand, your options are going to be limited to what the print on demand, mostly Ingram Spark and KDP, offer. And I would suggest choosing a trim size that is available on both platforms, because what you don't want to do is get a trim to do your paperback book through KDP, then decide 6 months from now you want to release hardcover through Ingram and find that you need to get a designer to rework all of your interior files because nothing works. Mm-hmm. The only piece of it that should change from a hardcover to a paperback is going to be the size of your cover, because if you look at a picture book, welcome to my basement, everybody. This is one of mine. You can see that the book block, which is the printed pages of the book, on a hardcover, the hardcover itself extends beyond that. On a paperback, the book block and the cover are the same size. So you really want to set it up so that you can use the same files as much as you possibly can. If you plan to do offset printing, which is using a traditional printer that has the big printing presses that sends the paper through and can cut it to whatever size you want it to be, you really have just about any option you want. I would start by asking your printer for what their most cost-efficient sizes are. And the reason for that is because I'm sure you guys have not actually seen a web press, but it has these giant reams of paper that fly over your head and print everything, and then it goes through a cutting machine and it gets folded a certain number of times, which is where your signatures come from. 16 pages come from the folding of the pages. But cost-efficient paper comes down to how many pages can you fit on a piece of paper without waste. So if they can all butt against each other and not have any waste, then it's going to cost less. Whereas if 3 inches of that paper has to be thrown away every time because you can't fit your trim size there, your book is going to be more expensive because of the wasted paper. I would, beyond that, say look at other books that are out there, see what feels right as far as size is concerned. I personally am not a fan of small square books, and that is just because I come from the world of Disney and mass market publishing, where a small square book is a media tie-in book or it's like a Bernstein Bears. It's this that costs $3.99, $4.99, $5.99, and you don't want to be putting your book out there for $3.99, $4.99, $5.99. It's fantastic for those because they're looking to sell so many of them to kids who like whatever TV show or movie or whatever it is, and it's a fast turnaround. It's not something that's going to have a long shelf life, but you're looking to sell yours for $7, $8, $9, $12, $15 to recoup your investment. So you want something that feels like it's worth that. So if you're doing an offset and you want to do a square and you can go up to 9x9 or 10x10, that feels like a heftier book. It feels more worth it. I know a lot of people do publish in 8.5x8.5, and at least that is a little bit bigger than that. But keep in mind what the perceived value is over your size and whether it's really going to feel like it's worth what you have to sell it for in order to recoup your money.
Now, does it matter, just to kind of expand on that, from the bookstore perspective, sometimes books are so big they don't fit well on the shelves. Do you find that there's any feedback or, preference from a bookstore perspective or things that they like to stay away from?
So the 8x8 that I was showing you is going to go in what we call a spinner rack. They slide in and they get stacked front to back. You're not necessarily going to see them. If they have spines, you might be able to see them. Otherwise, you're only going to see what's up front. Pretty much anything that size goes in that spinner rack. They do the same a lot with the reader trim, which is 6x9, because there's a specific spot for something that size. Beyond that, they don't really have much preference, except that a bookstore shelf cannot exceed 12 inches. So I believe the largest a book can be to sit, at least at a Barnes & Noble, on their shelf is 11 3/4 inches tall, which is not a cost-efficient size, by the way.
That led me to a quick question. I thought that Barnes & Noble, don't they order everything through Ingram Spark? And I thought Ingram was the biggest name. Is that not correct?
Barnes & Noble is going to order from Ingram for your books. They're not going to order from Ingram from a publisher. They're going to order from the publisher.
Good deal. Okay. I was just wondering because I like 10x10s also, so I was wondering if there was a way around that.
Yeah, they do. And I actually had a conversation with the head buyer at Barnes & Noble about that recently. And yeah, everything they do goes through Ingram because that gives them a catalog that they can actually pull and order from, as opposed to traditional publishers who have their own catalogs and have their own accounts set up where payments can be made.
Good, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brooke, do you recommend landscape or portrait if it's a rectangular size book, or it doesn't matter?
I like landscape books. I think they're nice for picture books, especially sitting with a kid with a book that can really span across your lap. It is more challenging from the self-publishing perspective, and that at least at this time, I believe Amazon does not offer a landscape option. So it would have to be either going through Ingram or going through an offset printer. But as far as actual experience, I do like landscape books.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Jenny says, what about fruit character books about friendship and love and self-love? Because you were talking about the different types of characters. So I guess hers is has fruits as main characters.
There's nothing wrong with fruits as main characters. Make sure your characters are compelling. Make sure your art is compelling. Make sure that fruit can really have human expression. Especially a book about self-love, being able to understand, and friendship, being able to see in a book what a character is thinking is so important. It's one of those things about picture books, and I'm sure that you guys know this. The art tells the story just as much as the text does. And the art, one of its key purposes is conveying emotion so that your text doesn't have to get it all across. Your art can show that a character is angry without you having to take your words to do that. You can show that they're happy or sad or whatever it is. And I have absolutely sat with my kids and pointed to a character and said, how are they feeling? And asked them to really take in not my words, but what they're seeing with their eyes, because that's what they're going to be doing, talking to a person in real life. They're weighing body language, they're weighing emotions on their face. So characters who are fruit are fine, but make sure that your art is strong enough to convey what's going on.
Roger says he doesn't want any spelling or grammar errors in the book. Any recommendations on how to ensure that that is achieved? For example, should you hire 2 proofreading edits to decrease the potential error?
There's absolutely no guarantee. There is none, unfortunately. That's the way that books work. It should be easier with a picture book because there are fewer words. The goal is always, of course, to put something out that has no errors in it, but we're human and mistakes happen. And the nice thing about print on demand, at least if you're not doing offset printing, is that you can fix it. It's a case of do the absolute best that you can and make reprint corrections if you need to. It's the same thing that publishers do. They have a long list of reprint corrections, and every time they go back to the printer, they fix all of those pages and they send them back and they double check them. And the next time through, they fix the next 10 things that somebody found that's wrong. I do recommend not using your developmental editor as your copy editor. Whoever is working with you on editing your book and getting it shaped properly, by the time you've read a book 10 times, and you know this from having worked on one, you are reading what you think is there. You are not reading what is really on the page anymore, no matter how careful you are being. Get a fresh set of eyes who has not read it before, and they are more likely to find the problems. I also would suggest getting somebody who is actually a copy editor. It's tempting to say, well, my friend is an English teacher. She teaches grammar. She can read it. That's fine. The thing about copy editing for a book is that there's more than just grammar that goes into it. There are stylistic considerations as well. Books follow the Chicago Manual of Style as far as copy editing is concerned. And a copy editor who is truly a copy editor knows that book inside and out. If you ask them where something is, they're going to tell you what section it's in without even checking. Somebody who can't do that is going to be looking it up, and that book makes no sense. I used to copy edit, and I could never find what I was looking for in there because it's never under what you think it's going to be under. So find somebody who is trained, not as an editor, but as a copy editor to look it over. And then I would say and the copy edit happens after your book is edited, before your book is laid out. Once your book is laid out, hire a proofreader. Proofreader is not your copy editor. A proofreader is a different person, and they are looking for different things. They are a fresh set of eyes, again, to catch anything the copy editor missed, but they're also looking for bad breaks of words. They're looking for widows or orphans on your page. They're looking for actual design elements in your text that aren't sitting correctly. And they should be reading it against your copy edited manuscript to make sure that it matches, except for any typos that were missed.
Okay.
Roger, you hit the nail on the head. I just ordered my books today, and I'm like petrified of typos. Like, I don't know if there's any way to get over that, but it's just a serious thing to put something out there like that. So, yeah, not feeling any better.
I would tell you that, as authors, you are the most critical consumers. As a parent reading a book, I am trying to get through that book fast, and most of the time my eye is going to gloss over a typo anyway.
Well, thank you for saying that, because that helps a little bit.
I think the category in which it matters more than anywhere else is in early readers and early chapter books, when a child is learning how to read, where a typo can actually trip them up. Yeah. You as an adult, your brain is going to see it the right way, and it's not going to stop you from reading the book.
Stella's wondering about upcoming trends. You were talking about that there was a way that agents would know about that. Is there a way for self-publishers to get that information?
It's hard. It's really just about what agents are seeing coming their way. And the best that I can suggest is get on the chat boards and ask what people are writing about. See if something keeps coming up over and over again. People are posting about their books from the earliest stages, so see if something feels like you're seeing it a lot. I've not seen anything coming my way over the last few months that has felt different from what I've seen in the past. You know, the most recent one was coronavirus, which makes sense. You know, if there's something big happening in the world, then certainly there might be space around it. But trends are weird. They hit without anybody knowing where they're coming from, and then they're all over the place.
Yeah, for a while there, I couldn't stand to look at another unicorn book to save my soul. Sri is saying she's seen a lot of books about girls and gymnastics, but not much about boys and gymnastics. Any thoughts on that? Is it too narrow a topic?
That probably comes down more to the parent, honestly. You know, as a boy mom, we're largely enrolling my sons in tennis and soccer and baseball and all of those traditionally boy sports. If one of my kids expressed an interest in gymnastics or in dance or something like that, I certainly would do it. But I think there's just areas that are more traditionally boy and traditionally girl. And as far as market size, the assumption is that a book about gymnastics is going to be about a girl. And if a boy is interested, then he'll read it. In picture books, kids are really willing to read about either gender. So it's not as significant that they are accurately reflecting their gender. As you get older, we have found that girls will happily read about boys, but boys do not want to read books about girls, which is why as you move into middle grade and beyond, you find more male protagonists than female.
Priya is asking, do you think Buddhism picture books on harmony would appeal to general parents and not only Buddhists?
I think that's going to fall under the mindfulness category, which seems to have strong appeal right now. So it's going to be about how you market it to them.
Okay. And Carrie's wondering, she would love to know more about your service on giving artistic direction to authors in order to guide the illustrator. How does that work, and what's the depth of the direction?
Sure. So as an editor at a publishing company, part of the job is to look at every stage of art that comes through and offer critique on it. That might be, I don't like the pose of this character. It might be the text is not fitting there, shift it around. So for me personally, I do offer that service where I will look at every stage of the art and I will offer my feedback on it. It might be, make room for the text to fit down here. This character looks weird. You're missing the strap on this one's shoulder, whatever it might be. And it's just going through and it's giving you all of the same sort of feedback that I would have given to my artists at the traditional houses, because sometimes as a self-published author, you're not really sure consistency-wise what you're looking for. You're not sure text placement-wise, or I had a fight with one of my author's designers about 2 years ago because every single page was a full bleed page, which, if you don't know, means that the art extends around and bleeds off all four sides of the page. None of them were spreads. They were just full bleed, which meant that everything in the gutter was bleeding into everything else in the gutter. And I said, this does not work. You need to separate some of this out. Some need to be spot pieces of illustration. You need to fade this. The eye can't take this all in. And she said, picture books don't do that. It's always full bleed. So I pulled out my picture books because, of course, as you can see behind me, I'm not lacking in picture books. And we changed it. So it's things like that. Saying to your designer or your artist, whoever it might be, this isn't working. The kid's not going to know where to look, or the visual cues are happening in the wrong order. It's going to throw them off, whatever that might be, each stage until you get to the final art and feel comfortable that you have a book that looks like it should.
Okay. And Pat is wondering, in looking for an editor, what might a self-published author be prepared to pay for an editor, a ballpark range, and how many revisions do you think would be included with the edit?
Every editor is different. I have seen some of the posts that go up on Facebook when people are looking for an editor, and I've seen, I will do absolutely everything for you, no matter how many reviews it is, for $90. I have seen your first round of review is going to cost $400. Personally, I would say that you're going to pay for experience. So somebody who has been doing this for a long time, who has a background where they actually were taught how to do it as opposed to taught themselves how to do it, is going to cost more. I came up through publishing companies. My first boss now heads up Bantam Doubleday. She was the one who taught me how to edit a picture book. She was taught by people before her who knew how to do this. You know, it's not something that I picked up and said, I think this sounds good. So my rates are probably going to be a little bit higher than somebody who just said, I'm going to be an editor. And there's nothing wrong with those people. They might have fantastic ideas, but there's going to be variety in there. The Editorial Freelancers Association suggests that books should be edited at a rate of 2 cents per word. I think in picture books, you're going to find that that's not an accurate number at all. That's going to hit more for a longer book where it doesn't also have to think about how the page turns are happening and what's being conveyed in the art versus in the text and how are you marrying those two. So for me, I vary. My assessment is either $100 or $150, depending on your word count. Anything under 400 words, I come down because it's a lot easier to read. And my developmental edit is at $150 if it's under 400 words and $200 if it's above 400 words. To me, that feels like a fair rate for the amount of time that I'm going to put into doing a book. But I also know how much time I'm going to put into doing a book. I don't know what somebody who's charging you $800 is putting into it. And I don't know what somebody who is charging you $90 is putting into it because I haven't worked with them. As far as number of edits, again, I think that comes down to what the editor is doing for you. For me, I usually find that 1 assessment and 2 rounds of developmental editing gets you to a final book. If you have come back to me and you say, you know, I need this to have one more look over, I don't charge somebody to look at it again. We want to get you to a final book. We want to get you to a book that you're happy with. So definitely ask that question of any editor you're working with. Make sure that you're not going to find that you're 6 edits in and suddenly you owe them another $600. But more than the cost, my recommendation would be to get a sample edit from anybody who you're thinking about working with. Because editing is subjective, and not every editor and every author is going to get along. They're not all going to be a good fit. You want to see a sample done to your book. You want to see how they're changing your words, because I've gotten samples from people that are on other people's books, and that doesn't do me any good. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know how that's going to impact me. By doing a sample on your book, you not only know what I'm going to do for you, you also know that I'm not sending you a sample that somebody else did. It can only have come from me, because how else would I have had your book in my hands?
So can you explain a little bit more, Brooke, about what is a sample edit and what should we expect with that?
Absolutely. So a sample edit is you sending me some portion of your manuscript and me editing it. Honestly, it's usually for a sample. I combine the developmental and the editorial assessment stage. So a picture book, 1,000 words, I'm maybe going to go through the first 2 or 3 pages of the book and give you any questions I have, any text changes that I would make based on where you stand right now, so you can really get a full feel for how the book is going to look as a finished product. If I get 3 or 4 pages in and I haven't found anything that would be an assessment note, I'll dig for one because I want to give you an example. Or if I really can't find any, if the book is good, then I'm going to tell you that too. I'm not going to have you pay me for an assessment if you don't have any major problems. Some people will say they'll do, especially on longer books, I've heard I'll do 2,500 words as an assessment. As a sample edit. Again, how much is very dependent on the individual editor. For me, it's enough to just give you a strong feeling for what you're going to get back from me. How am I going to change your language? What kinds of questions am I asking you? Am I pointing out to you from the very beginning that your book is not actually starting on page 1 because you've forgotten to include a title page or a copyright page? Am I pointing out to you that page numbers go even odd, not odd even? Because I've gotten books that go 3, 4, 5, 6. And when you're planning for spreads that look like that, your book is going to not turn out properly. So all of those kinds of things I'm going to throw out to you in a sample edit. That's my moment to show you what I can do and what value I bring to the table.
Okay. Would you just review the types of edits one more time? We had a couple questions around that.
Absolutely. So first up is the editorial assessment. That is looking for problems with the manuscript, plot holes, Scenes that are out of place, scenes that aren't needed, places where a book is too long and you can find obvious places to cut it. It might be questions about who's talking, saying there's not enough emotion here, you're showing instead of telling. You gave the example earlier of a story literally being told from the wrong point of view. It's looking for all of those things that need to be fixed, because to go in and edit your words without those things being fixed would be a waste of time. It'd be a waste of your time, your energy, and your money, because I'm then editing a book that's not working anyway. You want to get everything as perfect as you can before you actually start focusing on the words. Mm-hmm. From that point, you move on to a developmental edit, which is also called a substantive edit or a line edit. That is going through, that is changing the actual language of the book. It might be grammar, it might be how something is phrased, it might be getting rid of she said 6 times in a row, and instead putting the character nodding up front so that you have a chance to change the way that dialogue tag is used so that you don't have redundancy. It's all of those things where it's really about finessing the language, making it read smooth, making the language sing, for lack of a better word. For me, and I cannot speak to any other developmental editor out there, it's also a moment to look at the pagination of the book. If you are self-publishing, because a traditional publisher doesn't want you paginating the book for them, if you are self-publishing, I will always send you back with a developmental edit my suggestions on how to paginate the book and art notes, which are my thoughts on what should go on the page. The reason I do that is because sometimes as you move through a book, you look at it and say, I have the same thing happening visually 4 pages in a row. So is there something that maybe I should cut here? Is something not working? Should I shift something to another page? Is my page turn sitting in the wrong place? With a picture book, it's all about getting to the end of a page or the end of a spread and wanting to turn the page to see what's coming next. So where the page turn sits is incredibly important. So to me, doing a developmental edit, part of it is figuring that element out as well. Once you finish the developmental edit and the story, the language is right, your next step is the copy edit. Copy editors are going in, they're looking for grammar issues. They're looking for style issues. They are looking for inconsistencies in a manuscript. Did somebody slam the door 3 pages ago and now it's wide open? They're going to be the ones who caught the fact that that door should not be open, that it was already closed. Mm-hmm. They're looking for things like, these are thoughts and they have to be in italics because that's how book publishing does it. They're looking for all of those stylistic and grammatical things that you want somebody to find that's not going to be your developmental editor, either because they can't, because they're not trained in it, or because they've just looked at it so many times that they're glossing over it. Once you get your copy edit done, you're going to move on to art and laying out the book. So your designer and your illustrator. They will do as many stages as are needed to get the book where it needs to be. Final step before the book goes to the printer is proofreading. That's looking at the final designed pages and making sure that no errors have crept in, that the formatting of your text is right. That could be that a word is breaking funny. We do not break words in picture books across lines. That is not a thing that is done. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get it back from a designer or an illustrator and the word's not going to be broken. So a proofreader's looking for that. They're looking to make sure that a piece of art that is a spot piece of art hasn't shifted up a hair and isn't cutting off the bottom of a Y. And now you're missing just the very bottom of it, which looks funny. They're really giving it that last close look to make sure there is nothing wrong with it before it goes out. Mm-hmm. And those are the 4 stages.
That's great. Sarah is asking, she says she has an incredible agent, but they've had trouble finding the perfect publisher. Now that she has a complete book, she's interested in traditional publishing again. Do you ever see publishers pick up completed books like that?
It really doesn't happen. A publisher is going to, for 2 reasons. One, they want to put their own artist with the story. They want, one, what is going to fit their vision, And two, a lot of times what will happen with a new author is that an established artist will be attached to that project, because they can then go out and say, this artist has a following. So even though the author doesn't, it gives it something else to boost that book along and for more fans to find it. Once a book has been put out, it's not really worth the publisher's efforts to try to sell something that is already available to people. They want new books. So you're not likely to get a book that you've already published picked up by a publisher. What you might be able to do, if you are really out there and you are really selling hard, is to go to a publisher and say, hey, guess what? I have this picture book. I sold 20,000 copies of it. Book 2 is ready. Would you like to partner with me? In that case, then yeah, they might pick up book 1 and keep getting the back order on it, and then pick up with you from book 2. A book at a traditional publisher is considered a success if it sells 10,000 copies. We don't print under that. That's the minimum amount that has to go out the door in order for it to be a success. So if you go to a publisher and you say, I sold 4,000 copies, they're not going to be interested. Okay. Tell them that you did 18,000, 20,000. Now they might be interested. Then the question for you becomes, if you can sell 20 or 30 or 40,000 on your own, where does it make sense for you to go to them? Are they going to really bring something to the table? And they might. It might be that you have been killing yourself to do it and you can't keep doing that. And this is proof of concept that your books can go out and do well. Or it might just be that you're okay continuing to push it yourself and keep all of the profit margin as opposed to splitting it with them.
Okay. Yeah. And to bounce off of that, would you lose all the autonomy on the projects? That's I'm terrified of that because I'm so attached to my
traditional publisher.
Yes.
No, you don't.
You don't.
They might push you for changing little words here and there. And honestly, if they're asking you for a change, it's a qualified editor who knows what they're talking about. But no editor, first of all, no editor is acquiring a book that they don't already love.
Okay.
Because to push a picture book and to get a sales team on board with a picture book is an extreme labor of love. And it is convincing them that this is going to be the next big thing. So if it's only so-so, they're not wasting their time to begin with. But you own that intellectual property. They do not. They want to keep you happy. They want to keep it selling well. And they want your next book. So to alienate you by forcing your hand is not where they're at.
Okay. Thank you so much.
They might, so you know, come back to you on something like a cover and say, Barnes & Noble hates this. They've really asked us that we change it. And there they might push you because now you're talking about getting it in a store or not getting it in a store.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. One final question is, what about, could you repeat the word counts for picture books and older, early chapter books and older child chapter books?
Absolutely. So a picture book really should not exceed 1,000 words. The sweet spot on a picture book is between 500 and 700 words. Your next category up is an early reader. Those are, these are the leveled readers for children that are really learning how to read and are learning how to decode language. The word count on those at their lowest level, which is a level 1, is between 1 and 300 words. And as you move up through it, they don't usually exceed about 800 or 900 words. Again, because these are books for children who are learning language, who are sounding things out and trying to figure out how those letters string together to make the sounds that form words. From there, you move up to the earliest of chapter books, which unfortunately are not down here with me. They're all upstairs being read. You're thinking something like a Mercy Watson book, a Fly Guy book. They're usually all in color with art on every page. You're looking at probably 4,000 to 6,000 words max. And those are for your newly emergent readers who can read but can't handle anything super long. After that, you move up to a regular chapter book for kids about ages 6 to 8. And that's going to sit somewhere in the range of 10 to 15,000 words. Beyond that, you go to middle grade. Middle grade is for kids aged 8 to 12, sorry. And you have lower middle grade and you have upper middle grade. So lower is 8 to 10. You're probably sitting in about the 15 to 25,000 word category. Upper middle grade is going to be for 10 to 12. It's going to be about 25 to 35,000 words. Might go up a little bit more. Fantasy tends to run longer. Sci-fi as well. It can go as high as 50,000 words, but then you're really getting into ones that are intended for the 12-year-olds. You're talking things like Percy Jackson. And again, it's fantasy. It's running longer. And then after that, you're moving up into YA, which is 13 to 17. It's usually 50,000 words plus. And after that is new adult, which I don't think anybody in here is publishing into, but that's 17 to 20.
Okay. This has been such an informative session, Brooke. I can't thank you enough. And I appreciate you hanging in there a little bit longer with us because we had a great, very interactive question and answer. So thank you so much. I will be glad to share this recording with you as soon as it's available. And for those who have joined, I'm glad to also send out the replay for anyone who has registered. You'll automatically receive a link. If you have not registered, you heard about it and you jumped in, just send me an email and I'll make sure you're on the list as well. Thank you, everyone, and have an amazing day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, April, for having me.
Oh, this was awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.